Thanks, Joko. And here in the Westminster studio, we're joined by Labour's Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. Welcome to our budget special. Now, he's loosened his belt. He's going for slower deficit reduction. He's increasing spending. He's found money for universal credit, for nurses' pay, and for various other things. You must be happy with the direction of the budget.
Not really, not really. The scale is just nowhere near matches the need. I mean, universal credit, for every pound he's put in, he's taken £10 off. That's what's happening to some of the poorest in our society. NHS, less than half of what was asked for by Simon Stevens. It's over a 3-year programme.
But it's more.
It is more, but I don't think it'll meet the demands that we need. And Simon, remember on the NHS, Simon Stevens said that we could be a waiting list of 5 million if we don't get the 4 billion that we needed. And he's gone nowhere near that. Education, nothing. I tell you, there's another area. I've been raising this time and time again in recent weeks. Local authorities are telling us about vulnerable children. They've got a £2 billion gap. These are children who've been brought into care, need protection. Nothing on that. So I'm afraid it's not acceptable. It is a bit of a no-change budget, as far as I can see.
Would you have gone for even slower deficit reduction or no deficit reduction at all?
Well, we've got, on our fiscal rule, we're looking for eliminating the deficit of a 5-year rolling programme. But what I would have done is stop the tax giveaways to the corporations and the rich, capital gains tax, the bankers levy, and I would have invested that in public services.
How much would that have given you?
76 billion over the
Except the government's cut corporation tax and gained a 25% increase in revenues.
Not because of you're confusing correlation with causation. The increased revenues is coming because we've got some growth in the economy, small though that is, and that's as a result of some investment that's gone in. It isn't as a result of corporation tax cuts. I think what's needed now is a much fairer tax system so we can afford our public services, and we haven't seen that today, unfortunately.
How much do we now spend on paying the interest on our national debt?
A lot, a lot.
How much?
Well, I'll give you the figure, and I'll send you a note on the figure.
You don't know?
Well, I know the figure, but I haven't got it in front of me. I'll send it. You tell me now.
Well, at the moment it's 46 billion.
It was 56 and it's gone down.
No, it's going up.
Well, no, it's gone down previously, but now it's going up
No,
again.
I assure you it's going up, and it will go over 50 billion. Look, if you didn't know the figure, then you don't know whether it's going up or down.
I can remember the trend.
And you would add to that.
Well, the issue is, and it's exactly as Sajid Javid said in a cabinet minister only a few weeks ago, when you've got a desperate need, for example, for housing, when interest rates are so low, that's the time when you borrow. And when you borrow to invest in that way, you get the return because it will be matched in terms of the multiplier effect.
Well, but we already spend more just on interest. We, the British taxpayers, spend more just on servicing the interest payments than we do on defence and on transport. And you would add to that with your policies. It would be a lot more than 50 billion.
What's happened is that the current Chancellor has increased the debt by about 800 billion. And he's done that as a result of failure to invest in the early stages of 2010 onwards. And if we'd have done that, we'd have grown the economy and we would have been able to afford the public services that we've got, and we wouldn't have had the productivity crisis that we've got now.
But we already have a national debt of over 1.7 trillion.
Almost doubled,
And your plan is to add to that. You are going to borrow...
It's almost...
hold on, let me go through. You're going to borrow another 250 billion for your infrastructure fund.
Over a 10-year period.
Yeah, so 25 billion a year extra. You're going to borrow for nationalisation. That's tens of billions more.
No,
you're going to borrow for the PFI.
We would swap bonds for shares.
What's a bond?
And it is borrowing, but you pay for that because you bring in a profitable industry that will pay the debt.
Hold on a minute. The industries you want to nationalise, you only say are profitable because they're ripping off the customer.
We would be able to ensure that there's a proper rate of return to the state as well as reducing prices. If you're not shelling out, like in the water industry, £18 billion worth of share profits and dividends.
But how do you ensure profitability that gives enough for the nation to get a return and to cut prices for consumers?
Well, I'll give you the example. East Coast Line was brought back into public ownership and control and contributed £1 billion back into the Treasury, and it was run efficiently as well.
But they stopped investment.
But, well,
the head of East Coast said the way they did that was to stop investment.
So what you could do is instead of giving $1 billion back to the Treasury in terms of just cash or whatever, you'd then use some of that to invest. You'd manage it more effectively.
But ticket prices went up by a lot during that period. So
well,
if you want to do both things, as Andrew's saying, you want to do both things.
Exactly what we've argued.
And you say you can do them at the same time?
What we've argued is that if you manage it effectively, and it was managed effectively, you could have used some of that to reduce prices, you could have used some of that for investment overall.
But you wouldn't have had that. You wouldn't have had that much. And you are going to borrow billions
why
more.
Wouldn't you have had that much?
You're going to borrow because a billion's not that much if you're going to cut prices.
That was one
if you're going to cut prices.
Well, what I'm saying is that billion would have been used to cut prices, invest as well as.
But you are going to borrow billions to nationalise.
We're going to bring in an asset back into public ownership, so therefore it's neutral. You're borrowing to nationalise, but the servicing of that debt is paid for because you're actually having a profitable industry.
That's a question of whether you can run anything at a profit. That's
every time a rail system, the franchise has gone, it's been brought back into public ownership. At Connex and East Coast, it's been managed effectively.
How big a profit did British Rail make?
Well, that's the problem about British Rail. It wasn't properly invested in over a period of time. And actually, well, let me answer that one, because Catalyst a number of years ago did an analysis of British Rail and showed actually it was most probably one of the most efficient railway services across Europe, based upon the amount of money that was invested in there.
You said at the weekend that Paris had done this with the water supply.
The mayor of Paris was looking at
how much did Paris raise in bonds?
I haven't looked at the detail.
But you gave us the example.
Well, I gave us the example. What I was saying is other countries and other states are looking at how you bring things back.
But the Parisians have done this, but they raised no bond. You said this was how it was going to be done. Paris raised no bonds.
I didn't use Paris as an example of how you did. I said Paris is an example of it happening.
Yeah.
It is bringing
it
back
did happen in 2010. You said Paris was an example of how you would do it, and it turns out that the water management was only a management thing. They raised no bonds.
I said Paris was an example of it happening. I did not say we would use that model. I said we would use bonds, swap shares for bonds. It's perfectly done in previous nationalisations as well.
Do you accept that one of the biggest challenges facing this economy and its slow growth is productivity? And to do that, we need to attract investment.
But also you need to invest.
What signal does it send? A nationalisation programme, when you need private investment, what kind of message does that send?
Right. What you also need is the state to invest as well, because that gives the opportunity then for private investors to match that.
But what if you change your mind and nationalise something else?
Well, we haven't. We've set out a programme in our manifesto, and I've got no tricks up my sleeve. That's what we've said. And the interesting thing about this, when I'm talking to asset managers and others, they're coming to us appreciative because they want the certainty of a government that will invest in the long term. A range of asset managers.
Which ones?
I've said this in confidence to them. I'm not going to name them. I don't want to politicise them. It's like
but
Philip Hammond went and met business